Yeah, so I guess for me, once the collection manager came out officially, so that like More Than Most put together, and then Namrog's been working through a lot as well. I started going through the collection because at first, like before that really was public and before I knew about it, it was really challenging to kind of find what decks I wanted to pair because I was just basically looking at them in paper, trying to find what made the most sense, or just literally clicking on every deck over and over again to try to find which ones had specific cards. So once the collection manager came out and I had some categories to sort by, I'm like, this is perfect. I love data. So I'm an engineer by trade, and it's something where it's just like I like having filterable data that I could then manipulate and really use for my advantage. So going through my collection, I saw that there was like upgrade and free and a couple of those things that were built into the collection manager. And I was just like, free spells are really important because that's really the only way to gain resources in this game. So like basically being able to upgrade cards so you could play them at a quicker rate later in the game without having to use the resources earlier on, or just playing as many things as you possibly can. So I was basically filtering my collection to try to find as many free things, as many ways to upgrade cards as possible. And that's where kind of I started really pushing that archetype a little bit. And I definitely saw some people playing stuff like Forge Seal and Mantis. I remember specifically, I'm trying to remember his name. Um, it was I'll remember it as we're going, and I'll be like, "Oh, it was him." But there was one of the players who basically was playing a Forge Seal Mantis deck with a Sunder, or not a Sunder, a Cersei. And I remember thinking, like, oh, it was Auto Shot. There we
You
go.
got
I
it.
remembered it before it was even too far. He was playing a very similar list to what I was kind of moving towards. And I'm like, this is insane. Not only am I doing free stuff, but you're able to use your Forgeborn ability multiple times. So I know he was one of the first people I ever saw play that archetype. And I know Theory was another player who was playing that archetype a little bit towards the beginning of the game. And I'm like, Forge Seal Mantis, these cards are insane. I want to see any decks that I have that have both of these, and I kind of want to build off of that. And then kind of just finding the decks that I had with Forge Seal Mantis and Krogius, it kind of just spiraled from there. But it was just from there, I really liked that archetype and I played it a lot locally. And then over time, just testing and a lot of playing against the top decks, and it's just where I recognized was very well positioned into Worlds. So that's where I focused on that for the first Worlds event.
And the other thing that I loved hearing about your journey leading up to Worlds and your experience at Worlds, and this is through the multiple podcasts you've been on and talked about it, was this kind of friendly rivalry you had with Mandangu. You know, you were testing together, you were training together, and then you went and made the finals together. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so basically, there are two players that I played with all the time. So it was Cardboard Newton, Mundungu. It was basically just like I know the two of them are local to each other, and I played with both of them, and we kind of created this like little playtest group where we were always like messaging each other, talking about what we thought was good archetypes. We were playing other people's decks against each other, and I know Mundungu was like one of the like primary people saying like I think that Rumble Spark's going to win this event, and I'm like, you know what, I think like both of us had been like really pushing. So like we saw the how strong that deck was because we had done a lot of testing with it off of the kind of like tournament circuit online, because it was just one of those things where it's like we weren't bringing Rumble Spark decks to bronze events because we were like these are probably a little too powerful, but at the same time like they weren't showing up at a lot of the major original Ultimate Championships because like people just hadn't opened them yet. That set 2 came out right before that Ultimate Championship circuit, so a lot of people were focusing on green purple, and we were like, wow, like Rumble Spark's got to be insane. Like we think this might be the way to win the event. So like that's where we really like buckled down and we're like, we got to test this into everything and see what works. And I do think that Mundungu had the stronger Rumble Spark list than I did. And it was just like one of those things that I found myself was that as we played it, it really, whoever flips your Rumble Spark first is at the point where they're probably like 85 to 90% chance of winning that game, unless you flip immediately after. And that alone, even though you were basically at like an 85 to a 90% win rate against most of the other field, just knowing that in that mirror match, if a lot of people like became wise to the archetype and brought it to Worlds, that you were at a 50-50, just I was like, I can't do that. That's where it's just like we were play testing it, I was trying it, and then that's where just the amount of games that both of us had played with and against it, it just made it very like it gave me the strategy on how to play with and against Rumble Spark. But specifically, me and Mundagu would play all the time because we both very much wanted to do well at this event. And he had already done well at a couple Ultimate Championships on his own before we went into Worlds. And it was just one of those situations where like we would talk about what we thought was a good deck. We would play other people's lists. Like I remember we were playing Jurch's red list with like, I think it was like Eli's purple list. And we are like, this is the best deck that could possibly be out there. Thank goodness that both of those players don't have each other's lists.
Yeah.
And we were just like testing everything. And it was just like very much like he had played against that Forge Seal Mantis Krogius list quite a few times before Worlds. And he definitely had the positive winning rate there before the event. But it just, sometimes you draw well. And I do think that since Worlds, when I've played that archetype into Rumble Spark, I actually don't think I've lost yet, because it's just, I think I have so much experience into playing with Rumble Spark. Once you kind of know what you kill and like how to best utilize your resources, like that deck becomes a little bit easier to beat. So it's just like very hard initially, because it's just like you put so much effort into killing a Rumble Spark when they just bring it back very easily. So it's a lot about how can I value block, how can I value play my cards, so I can block the Rumble Spark multiple times and still live and still push my game forward. But specifically, Mundungu is a very competitive, very good player. And I think that by testing with him as well as Cardboard Newt, because again, the three of us had just basically like round robin a bunch of decks, it really pushed us to be prepared for what was out there. Because one of the nice things about SolForge is that unique people have unique lists, but if those lists are public, you could actually physically test against those lists and know what to play. So yeah, I think just overall, like Mundungu is a very strong competitive player, and I think both of us made each other better by playing against each other, and it was just a very fun pod to play with, because they're also just both very good people. So
that makes a big difference, having good people to play against that you're friendly with, having people that are competitive and that can explain why they think you should have taken this line or that line can really up your game, in my experience. So yeah, that's nice to hear.
100%.
Yeah. I want to go back into some of your previous games again. I guess this podcast is probably going to be jumping forward in time and back in time. Are there any other games you've played that you broke up with, or that obviously there are games in your past, like what about Flesh and Blood right now? Where's that for you? Or are there other games you're playing on the side at the moment? I'm interested in, some people I would call monogamous gamers, and I'm one of them. I only have enough space in my brain for one because I go so hard into whatever game I'm in, but I'm always interested in the people that can like straddle multiple games, or they get like a benefit from that, in that they might burn out if they're just, playing one game all the time too much.
Yeah, so I would say usually I'm somewhere between 1 and 3 games is what I would be willing to play at once, from a financial perspective as well as just a mental capacity perspective. So I would say, honestly, Magic's probably the game that I've broken up with, I would say, over the years, because even though I've gone back and forth to it, the more I've played other games, I've found that just like Magic's mana resource system, where you can get mana screwed, and there's so many games that just kind of end up being non-factors because of the fact that you just didn't draw mana, is enough that I've just found that some of these other games that have better solutions have just been more exciting for me, and they feel like they're a little bit more skill intensive, which again, I know Magic's a very skill intensive game, and I know it's a game that I've loved over the years, but I just, since playing stuff like Flesh and Blood and SolForge and Star Wars and a lot of these other games, I've just not found myself wanting to go back and play Magic over the last couple of years. And it's something that, even though I'm a little sad, because like every once in a while I'll look through my cards and be like, wow, I put a lot of effort into this collection, I'm very much happy with the games that I've been playing moving forward. So from the Flesh and Blood standpoint, honestly, I would say that since I started playing SolForge, I've backed off of Flesh and Blood a little bit. Part of it's just because I think the game just got very repetitive for me. Now, granted, a lot of new sets came out, but my local scene was a lot of very similar decks over and over again. And I just felt like the community had a lot of fractures in it locally. So there was a lot of drama on and off. And it just got to a point where there was like factions between the community at different stores, and it just wasn't the most friendly community, I guess, in that sake. Like all those people I'm good friends with, but it just kind of turned into a, like this store was kind of butting heads with that store, this person was butting heads with that person, and it just got to a point where I just wasn't enjoying that community as much, and I was just like, that kind of drove me away.
I haven't played Magic competitively, but I've through the games that I have played, I kind of deal with a lot of people who are like have PTSD from Magic, and you kind of see what they carry with them from that community. Whether it's like one of my first big Destiny events, like we came up on a point where there was like something we could have just like talked it out between us, but instantly he's calling the judge, and the judge is coming over because that's normal for that culture, in Magic. We'll just call the judge over. That took a little bit of getting used to. And like even some of the people that I play SolForge with, they've said they don't want to voice chat because they kind of the competitive thing, it's kind of PTSD they're carrying from that game. So it is interesting. It's the biggest game, so it's going to have the most people and the longest running culture as well, for better or for worse. But it is an interesting comparison to our very young game here, just a couple of years old.
I agree.
All right. Well, I think that's a good establishment for how you met SolForge, where the love sort of kindled, what are the games you're seeing on the side. So let's play our little sting into section 2, which is called Transformations. All right, so here I'm sort of focusing on moments of change in the way you looked at the game. We've already talked about one initially, which is, sort of from sitting down playing the game to, I think you said it was your third game, where you're like, okay, I'm really vibing this now. I need more packs kind of thing. But I'm interested about like big moments that changed the way either you felt like you were part of the community. And the biggest one that I can sense kind of like trying to put the timeline together for you is maybe becoming a Forge Guardian. So I haven't heard you talk too much about that on any of the pods. So I'd be interested to know, what was that process like, from applying to getting notified that you were becoming it? Or I'm just curious to know how that all happened for you.
Yeah, so I guess Forge Guardian kind of happened over the course of, I would say, maybe a year and a half to 2 years. So basically, they announced the program, if I'm not mistaken, about 4 to 6 months into starting the game, and they picked a couple people who were just very much immediately involved with the community. So it was like Milvambi, who actually helped build a lot of the rules of the game and was doing a really good part, like really understanding how the game had worked. We had More Than Most to help build the collection manager, which was pivotal for people to be able to really play this game competitively. And then we had Jerch, who was like one of the community leaders, had his podcast that had just started a little while ago and was really helping to spread the game. And then we had the Forge Guardians from the UK, both Dan and Rory, who were just helping to spread the game out in that area and were really involved with the community. So that program kind of got announced. There was a set of Forge Guardians who really helped to establish the start of that program. So as I was playing and kind of growing through the community, like I just kind of, in general, when I really love a game, I like to kind of take a stance of helping to develop that game. So once I kind of was playing a lot locally. So I guess when I first started playing, local was really the only way I played. So I didn't really play online for, I would say, the first like maybe 4 to 6 months. And then slowly I trickled into some online tournaments and things like that. But we had 2 stores that were running events weekly. So I was playing like 2 to 3 times a week locally with that local community, and it was like really thriving. And there was just like every week I would be playing in multiple tournaments. I would fuse new decks and play it for that week and then fuse something else. And like it was just something that like really I focused on in-person play. And then I would say once the game started maybe dying down a little bit locally, that's when I really started getting involved in the online community a little bit more than just like, hey, I want to trade, or hey, like let's talk a little bit about decks. And then I really started playing a lot more in online events. And then it got to a point where I realized there just wasn't as many online events that I would have liked, because I really enjoy playing games in a tournament setting. Like I enjoy the casual, hey, let's just jump in a game, but in those situations, sometimes you feel pressure to try to play decks that would match the power level of your opponent and look for ways that you could have a balanced game there. But with a tournament, it's like, hey, I just want to go play against people's most competitive stuff, and like let's go have fun and see how it works. So once that kind of competitive scene maybe started dying down a little bit locally, I was really looking for an avenue to be able to play more competitively online. And there was really a couple leagues here and there, but there was a gap of time where there just wasn't a lot of support in terms of official events. So I reached out to Alex once my community really started to die, the OP director at the time, and I'm like, hey, like my local community has lost a lot of steam, and I'm really looking for a way to help like potentially run events locally and potentially run events online, because I love this game and I want this game to succeed. So then he helped me make an account basically where I could run events. So I knew that there was a way that people could just go in and run events that were bronze, but I didn't want to do it without kind of like the okay from Stoneblade, because I know Renown was something that like technically someone could go manipulate, make a bunch of bronze events and just level up their decks. And that's something I just didn't want to do below board. And I kind of just was like, I really want to get some official response as well, just because my local community was kind of, I don't want to say it was dying, but it was slowing down. So I got a response from him. He helped me build